Attention! The polished marble of the courthouse shone, reflecting the tension etched on every face. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters clamored, and a woman named Genevieve Moreau, beautiful and poised, awaited the verdict that would define her future. She was the mistress, the other woman, confident that the man she loved, billionaire, industrialist, Alexander Cross would soon be free, but inside, in the silent courtroom, another woman stood her ground. This was Victoria Hayes, the wife, a woman scorned, but not broken. What unfolded next was not just a divorce proceeding. It was an intricate tapestry of deception, betrayal, and a wife's brilliant, long-game revenge. This is the story of how a woman who seemingly had nothing to lose walked away with everything, leaving an industry titan and his mistress with nothing but the bitter taste of their own arrogance. The world knew Alexander Cross as a titan, a man whose name was synonymous with power. His company, Cross Industries, had its tentacles in everything from aerospace technology to luxury real estate. His face graced the covers of financial magazines, his opinion sought by world leaders. To the public, he was the epitome of success, a modern Midas whose touch turned everything to gold. And on his arm for 25 years had been Victoria. Victoria Hayes was the perfect corporate wife. Gracious, intelligent, and impeccably dressed, she was the silent partner in Alexander's rise. She had hosted the dinner parties, charmed the investors, and raised their 2 children, an heir and a spare, in a sprawling Hamptons estate that felt more like a museum than a home. It was a life of gilded cages and silent sacrifices, a life Victoria had accepted as the price of admission to Alexander's world. The first cracks in their perfect facade appeared not with a bang, but with a whisper. A wrong number on a late-night phone call, a credit card statement from a boutique Victoria had never visited, the scent of an unknown, expensive perfume clinging to a suit jacket. They were small things, easily explained away by a man as skilled in negotiation as Alexander. A business dinner that ran late, a gift for a client's wife, a colleague who had gotten a little too close in a crowded elevator. Victoria, wanting to believe him, had accepted his explanations. To do otherwise would have been to acknowledge the tremor beneath her feet, the one that threatened to bring her carefully constructed world down. The whispers grew louder, taking the shape of tabloid headlines and blurry paparazzi photos. Alexander, laughing with a woman who was decidedly not his wife on a yacht on the Amalfi Coast. Alexander, his arm around the same woman, leaving a 5-star hotel in Rome. The woman now had a name: Genevieve Moreau. She was a French art gallery owner, 20 years his junior, with large, innocent eyes and a body that looked poured into her designer dresses. The public humiliation was a new kind of pain for Victoria. She had endured Alexander's emotional distance for years, his workaholic tendencies that made her feel like just another of his acquisitions. But this was different. This was a public declaration that she was no longer enough. The women of high society who had once envied her now pitied her. Their sympathetic glances felt more like daggers. The confrontation, when it finally came, was anticlimactic. It happened in their cavernous living room, surrounded by art they had collected together, monuments to a life that now felt like a lie. Victoria, holding a glossy magazine with Alexander and Genevieve on the cover, simply asked, "Who is she?" Alexander, always the pragmatist, didn't bother to lie. "Her name is Genevieve Moreau," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I'm in love with her." The words hung in the air, heavier than the crystal chandelier above them. Victoria felt a strange sense of calm descend over her. The years of anxiety, of silent suspicion, had coalesced into a single clarifying moment. The tremor was now an earthquake, and the ground was giving way. "I want a divorce," she said, her own voice, steady, surprising even herself. Alexander, who had expected tears, hysteria, perhaps even a plate thrown against the wall, was taken aback. He looked at his wife. He actually looked at her for the first time in years. He didn't see the wilting flower he had imagined, but a woman of steel. "Fine," he said, a touch of irritation in his voice. "My lawyers will be in touch with yours." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving Victoria alone with the wreckage of her life. That night, as the rain lashed against the windows of the Hamptons estate, Victoria didn't cry. Instead, she made a phone call. Not to a high-powered divorce attorney. Not yet. She called a man named Simon Davies, a retired forensic accountant who had once worked for her father. "Simon," she said, her voice a low, determined hum. "I have a job for you. I want you to find everything. Every shell company, every offshore account, every hidden asset. I want you to dismantle Alexander Cross's empire, piece by piece." On the other end of the line, Simon, a man who had spent his life uncovering financial secrets, smiled. "Victoria," he said, "it would be my pleasure." The game had just begun. Were you surprised by Victoria's calm in the face of betrayal? Do you think Alexander underestimated his wife? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Eleanor's army, a strategic counterattack. While Alexander was busy flaunting his new love, Victoria was quietly assembling her army. She knew that to win this war, she needed more than just a good lawyer. She needed a strategist, an investigator, and a secret weapon. The strategist was an easy choice, a formidable Chicago divorce attorney who took no prisoners, named Diana Thorne. Known for her meticulous preparation and ruthless questioning, Diana had a reputation for leaving her opponents' wallets significantly lighter. The investigator was Simon Davies, the forensic accountant, a man whose unassuming appearance hid a brilliant mind. Simon had a gift for finding the needles in the financial haystacks of the world's richest men. He operated out of a cluttered office above a bakery in Wicker Park, a world away from the gleaming skyscrapers of the Loop. But his reach was global. The secret weapon was a woman named Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was a former art restorer, now running a boutique art advisory firm. She was also one of the few people who knew the dark underbelly of the art world, a world of forgeries, inflated appraisals, and secret sales. A world that Alexander and Genevieve had been using to their advantage. Victoria's first meeting with her team took place in a discreet hotel suite in downtown Chicago. The air crackled with a silent intensity as Victoria laid out her plan. "Alexander believes this is about his infidelity," she said, her voice steady. "He thinks I'm a scorned wife looking for a generous settlement. He's wrong. This is about 25 years of my life, my contribution to his success, and I intend to be compensated for it." Diana Thorne, a woman with piercing blue eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, nodded in approval. "Alexander's initial offer will be insulting," she predicted. "He will try to hide his assets. He will claim his business is struggling. It's a classic move." "And that," Victoria said, a slight smile playing on her lips, "is where Simon comes in." Simon, who had been quietly sipping his tea, opened a worn leather briefcase and fanned a series of documents across the table. They were preliminary findings, a trail of breadcrumbs he had already begun to follow. "Alexander is a master of financial sleight of hand," he explained. "He has a complex web of offshore shell corporations, trusts, and limited liability partnerships, all designed to hide his true wealth. But he's not as clever as he thinks. He's left a trail. Over the next few weeks, Simon dug deeper into Alexander's financial labyrinth. He worked tirelessly, poring over bank records, tax returns, and corporate filings. He followed the money as it flowed from Chicago to the Cayman Islands, from London to Switzerland, from one anonymous shell corporation to another. It was a painstaking process, but slowly, a picture began to emerge. A picture of a man who had systematically and deliberately undervalued his assets, funneling millions of dollars into hidden accounts and investments. Meanwhile, Sarah Jenkins was investigating another piece of the puzzle, Genevieve Moreau's art gallery. On the surface, it was a legitimate business specializing in contemporary European art. But Sarah suspected it was more than that. She believed it was a front, a way for Alexander to launder money and hide assets in plain sight. Posing as a wealthy art collector, Sarah visited Genevieve's gallery. She was greeted by Genevieve herself, who was as charming and beautiful as the tabloids had described. Genevieve, eager to make a sale, showed Sarah around the gallery, pointing out works by several up-and-coming artists. Sarah, with her expert eye, noticed several inconsistencies. The prices for some of the paintings seemed wildly inflated. The provenance of others was questionable. She engaged Genevieve in a conversation about the art market, dropping names of obscure artists and dealers. Genevieve, for all her poise, seemed to have only a superficial knowledge of the art world. It was clear she was not the expert she claimed to be. Sarah's suspicions were confirmed when she discovered that several of the gallery's paintings had been purchased by a shell company Simon had linked to Alexander. The prices paid for the paintings were a fraction of their current appraised value. It was a classic art fraud scheme. Buy low, inflate the value through a series of fake appraisals and sales, and then use the artwork as collateral for loans or sell it for a massive profit. The puzzle pieces were beginning to click into place. Alexander was not just hiding his money. He was using his mistress's art gallery to do it. The art of the deal was not just a metaphor. It was their modus operandi. Back in her hotel suite, Victoria reviewed the evidence her team had gathered. The offshore accounts, the undervalued assets, the art fraud. It was a mountain of deception, a testament to Alexander's arrogance and his underestimation of her. A wave of cold fury washed over her. The betrayal was no longer just personal. It was financial, a calculated attempt to swindle her out of her rightful share of the empire she had helped build. "He is not just going to pay what he owes me," she said to Diana and Simon, her voice steel with resolve. "He is going to pay for his arrogance. He is going to pay for underestimating me. We are going to strip him of everything he has." The stage was set for a legal battle of epic proportions. Victoria Hayes, the quiet, unassuming wife, was about to show her husband and the world the true meaning of the phrase, "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned." How do you think Alexander will react when he finds out what Victoria has been planning? Will his arrogance be his undoing? Leave your opinion in the comments and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. The Sun. The ultimate weapon as the discovery phase of the divorce proceedings began, Alexander Cross remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. He was a man accustomed to winning, to bending the world to his will. In his mind, the divorce was a simple transaction, a business deal, no different than any other. He would offer Victoria a generous settlement, more than generous, he thought, and she would quietly disappear from his life, leaving him free to marry the beautiful and adoring Genevieve. His legal team, a phalanx of high-priced corporate lawyers from a prestigious Loop law firm, shared his confidence. They saw Victoria as a typical scorned wife, emotional and irrational, easily placated with a large sum of money. They presented Diana Thorne with an initial offer, a one-time payment of $50 million, plus the Hamptons estate and a small stock portfolio. It was a fortune by any normal standard, but it was a pittance compared to Alexander's true wealth. Diana Thorne, as predicted, rejected the offer out of hand. "Mr. Cross's offer is an insult to my client," she declared in a letter that dripped with icy disdain. "We will not be intimidated by his attempts to hide his assets. We are prepared to go to trial, and we are confident the court will see this for what it is: a blatant attempt to defraud a woman who has dedicated 25 years of her life to his success." Alexander was amused by the letter's tone. "She's bluffing," he told his lead attorney, a man named Marcus Thorne. "She has no idea what I'm worth. Give her a little more, another 10 million. She'll take it." But Victoria wasn't bluffing. While Alexander's lawyers were busy preparing what they thought would be a simple, straightforward case, Victoria's team was working in the shadows, meticulously building their case brick by brick. Simon Davies had unearthed a complex web of financial deception that even he, a seasoned veteran of forensic accounting, found impressive in its audacity. He had traced the flow of money through a dizzying array of offshore accounts in jurisdictions known for their secrecy: the Cayman Islands, Panama, Liechtenstein. He had discovered shell corporations with names like Pegasus Holdings and Orion Investments, entities that existed only on paper. Their sole purpose was to hold Alexander's hidden wealth. One of his most significant discoveries was a trust Alexander had set up in the Cook Islands, a remote Pacific nation with some of the strongest asset protection laws in the world. The trust, named the Jupiter Trust, held hundreds of millions of dollars in assets, including a portfolio of blue-chip stocks, a collection of rare classic cars, and a private jet. It was a fortress designed to be impenetrable, a financial black hole from which money could never be extracted. Or so Alexander thought. Meanwhile, Sarah Jenkins had continued her investigation into Genevieve Moreau's art gallery. She had cultivated a source, a disgruntled former employee of the gallery, who had been fired for asking too many questions. The former employee, a young art history graduate named Sophie, confirmed Sarah's suspicions. She told Sarah that Genevieve knew next to nothing about art, that the true mastermind behind the gallery's operations was Alexander himself. Sophie described how Alexander would purchase paintings from obscure artists at low prices, then use a network of experts to create a fake provenance and inflate their value. The paintings would then be sold to one of Alexander's shell corporations at the inflated price, creating a paper trail that made it look as if the gallery was a legitimate, profitable business. The artwork itself was then used as collateral for loans, which Alexander would then funnel back into his hidden accounts. The most damning piece of evidence Sophie provided was a set of coded emails between Alexander and Genevieve, emails Sophie had secretly copied before she was fired. The emails, disguised as lovers' chatter, were in fact a detailed log of their money laundering scheme. "Discuss our little project, the beautiful canvases that hold our secrets, and the new masterpiece that will soon join our collection," they read. It was a smoking gun, a clear and undeniable record of their conspiracy. Armed with this mountain of evidence, Diana Thorne prepared for depositions. A deposition is a crucial part of the discovery process, a chance for lawyers to question the opposing party and their witnesses under oath. It's a high-stakes chess match, a battle of wits, where a single misstep can have devastating consequences. The first to be deposed was Genevieve Moreau. She arrived at Diana Thorne's office looking every bit the glamorous art dealer, dressed in a sleek Chanel suit, her confidence unshaken. But her composure soon began to crumble under Diana's relentless questioning. Diana started with the basics, asking Genevieve about her background, her education, her experience in the art world. Genevieve's answers were vague and evasive. When Diana pressed her for details, for specifics about the artists she represented, the galleries she had worked for, the art fairs she had attended, Genevieve's ignorance became painfully obvious. Then, Diana moved on to the gallery's finances. She presented Genevieve with bank statements, sales records, and appraisal documents, all of which had been provided by Simon Davies. She asked Genevieve to explain the astronomical prices of some of the paintings, the questionable provenance of others, the series of transactions with offshore corporations. Genevieve, who had been coached by Alexander's lawyers to plead ignorance, stuck to her script. "I'm not a numbers person," she said, with a dismissive wave of her hand. "I leave the financial side of the business to my accountants." Finally, Diana pulled out the coded emails, the ones provided by Sophie. She read them aloud, her voice calm and measured, letting the damning words hang in the air. Genevieve's face went white. The color drained from her cheeks. Her carefully constructed facade shattered like a dropped vase. She looked at her lawyer, her eyes wide with panic, but there was nothing he could do to save her. She was trapped, her lies exposed for all to see. The deposition was a disaster for Alexander's case. Genevieve, the woman he intended to marry, had been revealed as a key figure in his scheme to defraud his wife. The beautiful, adoring art dealer was now a co-conspirator, a liability that threatened to bring his entire house of cards down. When Alexander was informed of the deposition's outcome, his amusement turned to cold fury. He had underestimated Victoria, her intelligence, her resolve, her ruthlessness. He had thought he was playing checkers, but he was in a game of three-dimensional chess, and he was losing. The storm that had been brewing had finally broken, and Alexander Cross, the man who had always been in control, was now caught in its eye. The trial was still weeks away, but the first battle had been fought, and Victoria Hayes had won. Do you think Genevieve deserved to be exposed in this manner? How blinded was Alexander by his own arrogance? Leave your comments, and don't forget to subscribe for the next twist in this saga. The fallout from Genevieve's disastrous deposition sent a shockwave through Alexander's camp. His lawyers, who had been so confident before, were now in a state of barely concealed panic. They advised Alexander to settle, to offer Victoria a much larger sum of money to make everything go away. But Alexander, his pride wounded and his arrogance intact, refused. "I will not be blackmailed by my own wife," he snapped. "We will go to trial. We will fight. And we will win." It was a decision born of hubris, a fatal miscalculation that would ultimately seal his fate. He still believed he could outmaneuver Victoria, that he could use his wealth and power to crush her. He decided to play his trump card, the one he had been holding in reserve, the one he believed would be his ultimate weapon. His son, Alexander Cross Jr., known to all as Alex. Alex was 24 years old, a recent business school graduate who had just started working for his father's company. He was a golden boy, handsome, charming, and fiercely loyal to his father. He had grown up idolizing Alexander, seeing him not just as a father, but as a hero, a giant among men. He had been shielded from the ugliness of his parents' marriage, from his father's infidelities, from his mother's quiet desperation. Alexander summoned Alex to his office, a vast, imposing space on the top floor of the Cross Industries building, with panoramic views of the city. He painted a picture of Victoria as a vindictive, greedy woman, a woman who was trying to destroy him, to destroy the company, to destroy their family's legacy. "Your mother is not the woman you think she is," Alexander said, his voice laden with a carefully crafted sense of sadness and betrayal. "She's being manipulated by her lawyers, Greedy sharks who are only interested in a big payday. They've poisoned her mind against me. She is trying to ruin me, and if she ruins me, she ruins you. Alexander needed Alex to testify on his behalf, to tell the court how wonderful a father he had been, how loving and supportive he had always tried to be as a husband. He needed Alex to paint a picture of Victoria as a cold and distant mother, a woman more interested in her social life than in her own family. Alex, who had always seen his father as infallible, was easily swayed. He was hurt and confused by the divorce, and his father's words preyed on his insecurities. He agreed to testify against his own mother, a decision that would have devastating consequences. Victoria was heartbroken when she learned of Alex's decision. Her son, the boy she had raised, the one she had protected from the harsh realities of their marriage, was now siding with the man who had betrayed them both. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any of Alexander's infidelities. Their daughter, a fiercely independent young woman named Charlotte, who was studying art history in London, was furious. She flew home immediately, confronting her brother in an angry, tearful argument. "How could you?" she screamed. "How could you do this to Mom, after everything she's been through, after everything he's done to her? You don't understand," Alex stammered, his usual confidence fading. "Dad isn't the bad guy here. Mom is the one who's trying to destroy everything." "He's been lying to you, Alex," Charlotte cried. "He's been lying to us our whole lives. Can't you see that?" But Alex, blinded by his loyalty to his father, refused to listen. The battle lines had been drawn, not just in the courtroom, but within the Caldwell family itself. The trial began on a cold, gray November morning. The courtroom was packed with reporters, high society gossips, and a smattering of curious onlookers. Genevieve Moreau, a shadow of her former self, was also there, sitting in the back row, her face hidden behind dark sunglasses. The first few days of the trial were a blur of legal arguments and witness testimonies. Alexander's lawyers did their best to portray him as a victim, a loving husband and father who was being ruined by a greedy, vindictive wife. They called a parade of witnesses, friends, business associates, even the family's former housekeeper, all of whom testified to Alexander's good character. Then it was Alex's turn to take the stand. He looked handsome and confident in his tailored suit, a younger, more vibrant version of his father. He spoke eloquently about his father's generosity, his love for his family, his dedication to his company. He painted a picture of a happy, loving family, a picture he knew deep down was a lie. Then Diana Thorne began her cross-examination. At first it was soft, asking Alex about his childhood, his relationship with his mother. But then her questions became more pointed, more probing. She asked him about the family vacations where his father was always on the phone, the school events his father had missed, the holidays his father had spent on business. Then she pulled out a series of emails and text messages between Alex and his mother. Messages that painted a very different picture of their relationship. Messages where Alex complained to his mother about his father's absence, where he thanked her for her unwavering support, where he told her that she was the only one who truly understood him. Alex's carefully constructed testimony began to fall apart. He stammered. He contradicted himself. He looked to his father for help, but Alexander could do nothing but watch, his face a mask of cold fury. The final blow came when Diana Thorne presented a copy of a trust document, a trust Alexander had set up for Alex and Charlotte. The trust would be funded upon Alexander's death. But there was a clause, a cruel, vindictive clause, that stated if Victoria ever remarried, both Alex and Charlotte would be disinherited. The courtroom fell silent as Diana read the clause aloud. Alex stared at the document in disbelief, his face pale. He had never known of this clause. He looked at his father, his eyes pleading for an explanation. But Alexander just stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. In that moment, the scales fell from Alex's eyes. He saw his father not as a hero, but as a manipulative, controlling man who would use his own children as pawns in his twisted games. He saw the truth of his mother's words, the truth his sister had tried to show him. He had been a fool, a blind, trusting fool. Tears welled in his eyes as he looked at his mother. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry." A son's betrayal had backfired. Alexander's ultimate weapon had blown up in his face, and in the process, had revealed the true depths of his cruelty. The trial was far from over, but the tide had turned, and now it was turning irrevocably in Victoria's favor. What do you think of Alexander's attempt to use his own son? Was Alex's breakdown on the stand a victory for Victoria or a family tragedy? Comment below and share this video if the tension has you on the edge of your seat. The verdict, the courtroom was still reeling from Alex's emotional breakdown on the witness stand. The image of the golden boy, crying and apologizing to his mother, was a powerful one, and it had a profound impact on everyone present, including the judge. Alexander Cross, the industry titan, the master of the universe, suddenly seemed small and pathetic. His legal team was in disarray. Their star witness had not only imploded, but he had also provided the prosecution with a piece of explosive evidence, the vindictive clause in the children's trust. The clause was a clear indication of Alexander's malice, his desire to control and punish Victoria, even after their divorce. The next witness to be called was Simon Davies, the soft-spoken forensic accountant who had been Victoria's secret weapon all along. He walked to the stand with a quiet confidence, carrying a stack of folders filled with financial documents. For the next 2 days, he patiently and methodically led the court through Alexander's complex web of financial deception. He explained in clear, simple terms how Alexander had used a network of offshore shell corporations to hide hundreds of millions of dollars. He presented charts and graphs that traced the flow of money from Chicago to the Cayman Islands, from London to the Cook Islands. He showed the court how Alexander had systematically undervalued the assets of Cross Industries, siphoning off profits into his hidden accounts. Then, he focused his attention on the Jupiter Trust, the fortress in the Cook Islands that Alexander believed was impenetrable. Simon explained that while the Cook Islands' asset protection laws were indeed formidable, they were not insurmountable. He had found a loophole, a small crack in the fortress walls. The trust had been created after Alexander had already begun his affair with Genevieve Moreau, and Simon argued that this constituted a fraudulent conveyance, an attempt to move assets out of the reach of a creditor. In this case, Victoria. Alexander's lawyers objected vehemently, but the judge, a shrewd and seasoned jurist named Judge Catherine Miller, overruled them. She was intrigued by Simon's argument and allowed him to continue. Simon then presented the court with his final piece of evidence, the one that would prove to be the nail in Alexander's coffin. It was a recorded phone call, a call Alexander had made to his banker in the Cook Islands just a few weeks before the trial began. The call had been legally obtained through a subpoena, and on it, one could hear Alexander's own voice, instructing his banker to move the assets from the Jupiter Trust to a new, even more secret jurisdiction. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as Alexander's arrogant, confident voice filled the room. "I don't care what it costs," he said on the recording. "Just make sure that money is gone. I'd rather burn it than give her a single cent." The recording was a bombshell. It was irrefutable proof of Alexander's intent to defraud his wife, to hide his assets, to obstruct justice. It was proof of a man who believed he was above the law, a man who was about to be taught a very harsh lesson. When the recording ended, there was a collective gasp from the courtroom. All eyes turned to Alexander. He sat frozen in his chair, his face a ghastly white. The Titan had been brought to his knees. The master of deception had been undone by his own words. The rest of the trial was a formality. Alexander's lawyers, with their case in tatters, could do little more than go through the motions. They tried to discredit Simon Davies, to portray him as a disgruntled former employee with a vendetta against Alexander. But Simon's testimony was too well documented. His evidence was too overwhelming. Finally, it was Victoria's turn to take the stand. She walked to the witness stand with a quiet dignity, her composure unshaken. She didn't talk about Alexander's infidelities or her own personal pain, but about the 25 years she had dedicated to her marriage, to her family, to building his empire. She talked about the nights she had spent waiting for him to come home from the office, the business dinners she had hosted, the clients she had charmed. She talked about the sacrifices she had made, the dreams she had put on hold, the life she had lived in his shadow. Her testimony wasn't emotional, but it was powerful. It was the story of a woman who had been a true partner, a silent partner in every sense of the word. And it was the story of a woman who was now demanding her due. When she was finished, there was a profound silence in the courtroom. Even Judge Miller, a woman who had seen it all, seemed moved. She looked at Victoria with a new respect, a new understanding. She didn't see a victim, but a survivor, a woman of strength and resilience. The closing arguments were brief. Diana Thorne, in a masterful summation, laid out the evidence of Alexander's massive fraud, his calculated cruelty, his blatant disregard for the law. Alexander's lawyer, in a last desperate effort, tried to portray Victoria as a woman consumed by greed and revenge. But it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming. The tide had turned. The crumbling of a Titan was complete. All that remained was for the judge to render her verdict. Did Simon Davies' testimony live up to your expectations? Was Victoria's final speech a masterstroke? Tell us what you think in the comments. The final showdown. On the day the verdict was to be delivered, the air in the Chicago courthouse was so thick with tension it felt like a physical weight. Every seat was taken. The benches groaned under the collective anticipation of reporters, high society gossips who had followed the trial with religious fervor, and law students eager to witness legal history. In the front row, the flashes of the cameras glinted off the stoic faces of Victoria's team. She sat between Diana Thorne and Simon Davies, a portrait of unnerving calm. Her hands were carefully folded in her lap, but Diana could see the faint, rhythmic clenching of her knuckles. It was the only sign of the tempest raging inside her. Across the aisle sat the wreckage of Alexander Cross's life. His expensive suit hung on him, his figure diminished. The confident Titan was gone, replaced by a hollow man with haunted eyes. He stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle was throbbing erratically in his cheek. His legal team whispered nervously at his side, shuffling papers that were now completely useless. In the back row, a ghost in a dark coat, was Genevieve Moreau. She looked small and anonymous, stripped of her glamour, a spectator at the public execution of the life she had so desperately coveted. A sharp rap of a gavel announced the judge's arrival. "All rise!" the bailiff's voice boomed, and the courtroom came to its feet with a scrape. Judge Catherine Miller entered, her black robe billowing behind her. She moved with a deliberate, unhurried rhythm that seemed to suck the remaining oxygen out of the room. She was a woman who understood the gravity of power, and today She wielded it in absolute terms. Taking her seat, she surveyed the courtroom. Her gaze swept over the faces before her, lingering a fraction of a second longer on Alexander. It was a look devoid of pity, a look of pure, unadulterated assessment. "I have reached a verdict," she began, her voice crisp and clear, cutting through the silence. The entire courtroom leaned forward as one. This has been a long and difficult trial. Divorce proceedings often are. They expose the sad, sordid details of a marriage that has tragically broken down. But what has unfolded in this courtroom over the last several weeks is something far more disturbing than a simple marital dissolution. This has been a trial about profound greed, systematic deception, and a shocking and inconceivable abuse of power. Alexander flinched, as if he had been struck. The color drained from his face. Judge Miller put on a pair of reading glasses and looked down at the thick document before her. "Let us first address the matter of Cross Industries and its valuation. The defense has argued this is a complex global corporation subject to market fluctuations. This is true. However, the evidence presented by Mr. Davies has shown with meticulous and irrefutable clarity that Mr. Cross is engaged in a deliberate campaign to artificially devalue his own company for the purposes of these proceedings. The network of shell corporations, from Pegasus Holdings to Orion Investments, were not legitimate business entities. They were instruments of fraud designed to siphon hundreds of millions of dollars away from the marital estate." She paused, looking straight at the jury box, now empty, as if addressing the conscience of the community. "Then we have the matter of the art gallery, owned and operated by Ms. Genevieve Moreau." In the back, Genevieve shrank further into her coat. "This court finds that the gallery was not a legitimate business, but a sophisticated front for money laundering. The coded emails between Mr. Cross and Ms. Moreau, discussing beautiful canvases that hold our secrets, were not lovers' flirtations, but communications between co-conspirators. The scheme to purchase art at low cost, fraudulently inflate its value, and sell it to Mr. Cross's own shell corporations is one of the most brazen attempts to hide assets this court has ever seen." Victoria closed her eyes for a brief moment. It was vindication, plain and simple. Every suspicion, every silent fear she had harbored for years was being validated, spoken aloud, in this temple of justice. The judge turned a page. But the deception was not merely financial. It was personal, and it was cruel. "I refer now to the Jupiter Trust, established in the Cook Islands, and more specifically to the clause regarding this marriage's children, Alexander Cross Jr. and Charlotte Cross." She looked over her glasses at Alexander. "To include a provision that would disinherit your own children, should their mother choose to remarry, is not merely controlling. It is an act of stunning malice. It is a testament to a man so consumed by his own ego that he would use his children as weapons in a campaign of personal revenge. It is, quite frankly, morally reprehensible." Next to his mother, Alex squeezed her hand, tears in his eyes. It was the final public confirmation of the truth he had so painfully come to accept. "Therefore," Judge Miller continued, her voice hardening, "this court must now render a judgment that not only compensates Ms. Hayes for her 25 years as a partner in this marriage and this enterprise, but also punishes Mr. Cross for his egregious conduct." She began with the undisputed assets: the Hamptons estate, the Park Avenue apartment, the stock portfolio, the fleet of cars, all awarded to the plaintiff, Victoria Hayes. A low murmur ran through the room. It was a clean sweep, but it was only the appetizer. "Now," the judge said, her voice dropping slightly, creating a dramatic silence, "we turn to the hidden assets, the funds held in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Panama, and Liechtenstein." the assets held by the network of shell corporations, the total fraudulently appraised value of the art collection, and the entirety of the Jupiter Trust, which this court finds to be a fraudulent conveyance. After a careful review of the forensic accounting provided by Mr. Davies, this court values these hidden marital assets at approximately $1.2 billion. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Alexander's face was now a ghastly white. He looked as if he was going to be sick. Given the scale of the fraud perpetrated by the defendant, Judge Miller declared, her voice ringing with authority, and his attempts to deceive this court and defraud his wife, my judgment is that these assets be divided as follows. She paused, letting the moment hang in the air, a sword suspended by a single thread. 30% to the defendant, Mr. Alexander Cross. The room held its breath. And 70% to the plaintiff, Ms. Victoria Hayes. Pandemonium! The word erupted in the courtroom. A reporter in the back shouted. The sound of a dozen laptops clicking at once filled the air. 70%. It wasn't just a win. It was an annihilation, a punishment of biblical proportions. Alexander slumped in his chair, as if his spine had dissolved. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder, but he was staring into the abyss that had just opened up beneath his feet. But Judge Miller wasn't finished. She held up a hand for silence. Furthermore, she said, her eyes fixed on Alexander, Mr. Cross will be responsible for the entirety of Ms. Hayes' legal and forensic accounting fees, and given the defendant's blatant attempts to obstruct justice and commit perjury before this court, I am left with no alternative. She looked at the federal prosecutor, who had been watching the trial from the front row. This court refers this entire matter, including all evidence and testimony, to the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois for an immediate criminal investigation. It was the final, devastating blow. A death blow. Alexander Cross was no longer just a ruined divorcee. He was a future criminal. His lawyer's jaw went slack. Financial devastation was one thing. The prospect of prison was another entirely. Court is adjourned, Judge Miller said, striking the gavel with a loud final crack that echoed across the crumbling of an empire. As she swept out of the room, the court erupted. Reporters climbed onto benches, shouting questions. Victoria, her face wet with tears of relief and vindication, fell into the arms of Diana Thorne, who was grinning. Simon Davies clapped her on the back, a rare, wide smile on his face. Alex hugged them all, a family reborn in the crucible of the trial. As Victoria and her team pushed their way through the crowd, she looked back one last time. Alexander was still sitting at the defendant's table, completely alone. His lawyers were already packing their briefcases, distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of their client. He looked small, pathetic, a king without a kingdom, a man who had everything, and in his insatiable greed had lost it all. The mistress had waited outside for a victory, but the wife had just walked away with justice. What did you think of the judge's verdict? Did you think Alexander would receive such a severe punishment? Leave your opinion and share this story if it left you breathless. A new legacy built on purpose. In the aftermath of the verdict, the world that had once revolved around Alexander Cross didn't just wobble. It spun off its axis and disintegrated into a million pieces. The headlines were savage. A public crucifixion for a man who had once been worshipped at the altar of capitalism. Titan takedown, the Chicago Sun-Times screamed. From mansion to prison, Caldwell's empire crumbles, the Financial Times reported. The man who was once a king, whose every pronouncement moved markets, was now a whispered cautionary tale in boardrooms, a symbol of hubris and its inevitable, spectacular fall. The U.S. Attorney's Office, handed a case on a silver platter by Victoria's team, moved with a speed and ferocity that astonished even seasoned legal observers. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, the offshore accounts, the fraudulent art appraisals, and the damning recording of his own voice, Alexander was cornered. His high-priced lawyers, now dealing with a federal indictment, advised him that his only option to avoid spending the rest of his life in prison was to cooperate. The arrogance finally shattered. In a quiet federal courtroom, stripped of his tailored suits and looking frail in a standard-issue prison jumpsuit, Alexander Cross pleaded guilty to conspiracy, wire fraud, and tax evasion. The judge, unmoved by his lawyer's pleas for leniency, sentenced him to 10 years in a medium-security federal penitentiary. The fall from grace was absolute. The man who once flew on a private jet was now shuffling in shackles. His new home was not a sprawling estate, but an 8-by-10-foot cell. His new associates, not CEOs and senators, but convicted felons. In the first few months, he tried to exert his old power, to bribe guards and manipulate inmates, but his currency was useless here. He was just a number, a ghost of a man, haunted by the echoes of a life he had arrogantly thrown away. Cross Industries, the juggernaut he had built, could not survive the stain of its founder. The stock plummeted to junk status overnight. Investors, terrified of further scandal, pulled out in a mass exodus. The board of directors, in a desperate act of self-preservation, purged his name from the letterhead and forced his resignation. The company was dismembered like a carcass, its divisions sold off to competitors for pennies on the dollar. It was a sad, ignominious end to a once great empire, dismantled as thoroughly as Simon Davies had dismantled its financial statements. Genevieve Moreau, the beautiful, ambitious mistress, became a pariah. Faced with her own indictment, she agreed to testify against Alexander in exchange for a lighter sentence. Her story, a blend of greed, naivete, and willful blindness, painted a pathetic picture. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. The Chanel suits were replaced by an orange vest she wore while cleaning graffiti from subway walls. Her art gallery was seized, her collection of fraudulent masterpieces auctioned off by the government. She disappeared from public view, a footnote in the epic downfall she had helped precipitate, her name forever linked to the scandal that had destroyed them all. And what of Victoria? She walked out of that courtroom with a fortune so vast it was almost abstract. But more than the money, she walked out with her freedom, a concept she was only just beginning to grasp. The first few weeks were disorienting. For 25 years, her life had been dictated by Alexander's schedule, his needs, and his ambitions. Now, there was only silence. The first act of her new life was to sell the Hamptons estate. The sprawling mansion, with its cold marble floors and ghost-filled rooms, felt like a mausoleum. She let the auction house take everything: the furniture, the art they had collected, the monuments to a life that had been a lie. She kept nothing but her personal belongings and a few photographs of her children as innocent toddlers. With the proceeds, she purchased a magnificent brownstone in Lincoln Park, a neighborhood that throbbed with life, art, and authenticity. It was the opposite of her old life in every way. Instead of manicured lawns, it had a small, wild garden. Instead of a formal dining room, it had a large, open kitchen that was always filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and newly baked bread. Her daughter, Charlotte, who had been her fierce advocate, became her partner. With Charlotte's expertise in art history and Victoria's newfound business acumen, they established the Victoria Hayes Foundation. Its mission was simple, yet revolutionary: to find and fund the brilliant women who were being overlooked and underestimated by a world still dominated by men. They poured millions into scholarships for female artists, grants for women-owned tech startups, and seed capital for female entrepreneurs. The foundation wasn't just a charity. It was an engine of change, powered by the very fortune a man had tried to hide from a woman. One of their first projects was saving a struggling gallery in Wicker Park that showcased the work of immigrant women artists. The gallery was on the verge of closing its doors when the foundation stepped in. Not just with a check, but with a team of mentors and business advisors. Victoria stood at the gallery's reopening, surrounded by vibrant, powerful art, and felt a sense of purpose that 1,000 social galas had never given her. Her relationship with her son, Alex, underwent a profound healing. The trial had been a brutal awakening for him, shattering the idol he had worshipped. Filled with guilt, he left the corporate world he had been groomed for and went back to school, earning a master's degree in social work. He now worked at a community center in the Bronx, dedicating his life to helping at-risk teenagers. He and Victoria met for lunch every week, their conversations filled with a new honesty and mutual respect. The bond, once broken by betrayal, was now forged in the fires of truth and forgiveness. On a gray afternoon, a letter arrived at the Lincoln Park brownstone. The postmark was from a federal prison in Pennsylvania. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. It was from Alexander. The letter was a rambling, self-pitying diatribe, blaming her, the judge, his lawyers, everyone but himself, for his downfall. It ended by begging for money, a fraction of the fortune she now controlled. The old Victoria might have felt a pang of pity, a flicker of residual obligation. But the woman she was now simply folded the letter and slid it into the fireplace. As she watched the paper curl and blacken, turning to ash, she felt the last, final link to her old life break. He had no power over her anymore. Victoria Hayes. The woman once known only as the billionaire's wife had risen from the ashes of her marriage, not as a vengeful fury, but as a creator, a builder, a force for good. She had taken the pain and transformed it, the stolen money, and sanctified it. She was often seen walking the streets of her neighborhood, a quiet smile on her face, no longer defined by the man she had married, but by the woman she had become. The world had watched a mistress wait outside a courthouse, hoping to see a wife destroyed. Instead, they had witnessed the birth of a queen. The 70% of the fortune was just the seed money. Her true empire, built on integrity, purpose, and an unbreakable spirit, was only just beginning. The story of Victoria Hayes is a powerful reminder that the scales of justice, though they may be slow to balance, eventually do. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the quiet, unbreakable strength of a woman who refused to be a victim. Victoria's journey, from being a silent partner in a gilded cage to being the architect of her own destiny, is a masterclass in strategy, patience, and unwavering resolve. She proved that the greatest power is not in wealth or status, but in knowing your own worth and having the courage to fight for it. If this story of betrayal, brilliant revenge, and ultimate triumph resonated with you, please like this video to show your support. Share it with others who appreciate a story where the underdog, armed with intelligence and integrity, comes out victorious. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that are more captivating than fiction. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. Thanks for listening. His pregnant wife found out. The millionaire bought a house for his mistress. She took the company instead. In a sunlit corner of San Francisco's exclusive Pacific Heights millionaire entrepreneur, Christopher Harrington seemed to have it all: a thriving tech conglomerate, a glittering social calendar, and a devoted wife expecting their first child. But appearances can be as fragile as spun glass, and behind closed doors, secrets festered like toxic vines. When Naomi Harrington, his pregnant wife, stumbles upon a deed to a lavish waterfront house purchased for an unknown woman, her world is shattered. Her heartbreak soon ignites a fire of determination, setting in motion a chain of events that will shake the city's elite and Christopher's empire to its very core. Christopher Harrington grew up in a modest home on the outskirts of Oakland. As the second son of Richard and Gabriel Harrington, he understood both the grit of hard work and the allure of financial success. His father was a carpenter, known for crafting fine cabinets in a small workshop behind their home. His mother, a part-time teacher, believed fervently in education and pushed her children to excel in school. Christopher, possessing a keen mind and an insatiable curiosity, stood out among his peers from an early age. By the time Christopher enrolled in Stanford University, he had grand plans. He absorbed every drop of knowledge he could, especially in business and computer engineering. He met a few bright-minded, similarly ambitious people, forging connections that would ultimately catapult him to the top. Shortly after graduation, he teamed up with these friends to launch a tech startup, Harrington Innovations, offering cutting-edge cloud-based security solutions that quickly captured the market's attention. Investors like Mark Cuban and Sequoia Capital came knocking. Within 5 short years, Christopher became a millionaire, many times over. Naomi Blair, on the other hand, was a San Francisco native from a respected but middle-income family. Her parents, Leonard and Marcia Blair, ran a well-liked bookstore that specialized in rare editions. Always more intellectual than materialistic, Naomi found herself drawn to the world of charity and social activism. She studied communications at UC Berkeley, working in public relations for non-profits after graduation. Her path first crossed with Christopher's at a fundraising gala in Los Altos. Despite their differences, the spark between them was instantaneous. He was amazed by her passionate soul. She was captivated by his ambition, tinged with a gentle charm. They married in a grand but intimate ceremony at a vineyard in Napa Valley. It was the kind of wedding that filled social media feeds for days. Endless photos featuring rolling hills, shimmering string lights, and a star-studded guest list. Everyone declared them the perfect pair, Christopher with his unstoppable drive, and Naomi with her gracious warmth. She was not only the face of their philanthropic arm, but also his trusted confidant. Together they seemed unstoppable, a power couple ruling over corporate boardrooms by day and hosting fundraisers at night. Life continued seamlessly for a while. Naomi supported Christopher's expansion plans, traveling with him to conferences and forging crucial alliances with philanthropic organizations. Christopher's business soared. He invested in a string of other ventures, luxury real estate developments in Los Angeles, a boutique hotel chain in Hawaii, and even an e-commerce platform in collaboration with longtime friend Lisa Thompson, a reputable figure in Silicon Valley. Every move seemed golden wealth poured in, and Christopher's reputation as a savvy entrepreneur solidified. But Naomi eventually grew tired of the non-stop corporate hustle. She longed for a family and a calmer life. After a particularly draining business trip to Singapore, she told Christopher she wanted to start trying for a baby. The notion of fatherhood wasn't entirely on Christopher's horizon, yet he was consumed with a massive expansion project for Harrington Innovations. Nevertheless, he promised Naomi they'd start a family soon. Weeks became months. drifted into a year of subtle frustration. Finally, one crisp fall morning, Naomi discovered she was pregnant. In the weeks that followed, their household glowed with anticipation. Naomi's morning sickness was rough, but Christopher soothed her with kind words, warm soup, and unwavering attention. At least at first. He already boasted about his unborn child in interviews, hinting at future generational wealth. Naomi found it endearing, believing him to be fully committed to both her and their future. Yet beneath that veneer of domestic bliss, Christopher wrestled with personal conflict fears and desires he carefully kept locked away. While Naomi focused on decorating a nursery, Christopher found himself swamped with new pressures. His ventures were hemorrhaging money in unexpected areas, and competition in cybersecurity was cutthroat. In the midst of it all, he was introduced by an old college friend to a dazzling woman named Felicia Morgan. It was at first a purely professional meeting regarding a potential marketing partnership, but Felicia's allure worked on him like a magnet, pulling him into a realm he had once thought he'd outgrown, or was too morally grounded to enter. And so the stage was set, a pregnant wife glowing with expectation, a husband seemingly devoted to both home and business, and the quiet presence of another woman lurking at the periphery of their perfect life. The tension remained invisible to the public eye, but destiny was already mapping out how secrets would unravel. It was only a matter of time before Naomi noticed the hairline cracks forming in her once ideal marriage. When she finally uncovered the truth, the reverberations would shake not only their marriage, but the very foundations of Christopher's empire. Naomi woke up earlier than usual, her energy spurred by her second trimester vitality. She pulled back the plush bedroom curtains to let the soft glow of morning light spill onto the crisp white sheets. She expected to find Christopher snoozing beside her, but his side of the bed was already cold. A faint hum of conversation reached her ears. Following the sound, she discovered Christopher pacing in his private study, talking on the phone in hushed urgency. She knew Christopher's anxious phone calls often involved either expansions, acquisitions, or last-minute crises. She also knew how protective he was of his business dealings. He insisted on keeping them separate from his personal life, yet Naomi sensed a different edge to his tone. Was it frustration, or was it guilt? She couldn't place it. As soon as he saw her, he ended the call abruptly and forced a smile. Just a minor hiccup at the LA property, he explained, brushing off her concern. In the following days, Naomi noticed subtle changes in his behavior. He often had after-hours business meetings, then returned home unusually late, reeking of expensive cologne that wasn't his own. He seemed more eager to travel without her. When she brought up her suspicions, he deftly shifted the conversation back to her pregnancy or the new hires at Harrington Innovations. Naomi wanted to believe he was simply under stress. After all, rapid corporate expansion was never simple. But a small, insistent voice in her head whispered, "Something's not right." One afternoon, she joined Christopher at a charity luncheon in downtown San Francisco. He was busy shaking hands with the city's elite real estate moguls, philanthropic socialites, even a few local politicians. At one point, Naomi briefly left him to speak with her friend and event organizer, Mia Richardson. Upon returning, she was startled to see Christopher lost in conversation with a striking brunette in a crimson dress. The woman's name was Felicia Morgan, according to the introduction. The atmosphere between them simmered with a certain tension. Christopher looked mildly uncomfortable, while Felicia wore a smile too personal for a business associate. Naomi's greeting was polite, but Felicia's eyes flicked over her with barely concealed curiosity. That night, Naomi found Christopher's mood had darkened. He barely spoke during dinner. She asked if something happened at the event, if Felicia Morgan was truly just another business contact. Christopher gave a vague reply about some potential marketing collaboration and insisted she relax, unsure whether to press him. Naomi kept her suspicions at bay, still the restlessness grew inside her. She realized that her usually empathetic and attentive husband was drifting somewhere beyond her reach. Meanwhile, the demands of pregnancy weighed on Naomi, both physically and mentally. She needed emotional support, someone to hold her hand through doctor's appointments, and to marvel at the baby's first ultrasound. Yes, Christopher attended the medical checkups, but his attention seemed split, always checking emails, replying to text messages, or slipping out to return phone calls. Naomi tried to mask her disappointment. She told herself that providing for their child was also an act of love. But she couldn't deny feeling lonely, even in the presence of the man she married. Outside the household, rumors started swirling around Christopher's circle of acquaintances. An assistant at Harrington Innovations overheard suspicious conversations. A close friend named Daniel Baker mentioned spotting Christopher in a posh restaurant late at night, not with Naomi, but with a mysterious woman. Naomi refused to lend an ear to gossip. She'd built her life on trusting Christopher's fidelity. However, trust starts to wear thin when cracks appear at every corner. Gradually, Naomi found herself questioning every detail, examining every word for hidden meanings. The tension grew to a crescendo. In a single moment of heartbreak, Christopher forgot the second ultrasound appointment. Naomi sat alone in the waiting room, her eyes scanning the door, expecting him to rush in. Any second, apologizing for being late, he never arrived. Naomi later learned he was in a meeting with Felicia Morgan. Although he apologized profusely when confronted, citing a last-minute crisis about brand identity, Naomi felt a shift inside her, as if the foundation of her trust had started to quake. In the aftermath, Christopher tried to make amends, booking a luxury spa session, for her organizing a lavish baby shower in collaboration with Lisa Thompson, and flooding her with gifts. On the surface, life returned to normal. Yet Naomi's sixth sense wouldn't let her rest. She could almost taste the bitterness of betrayal in the air. Something was brewing, and she was determined to find out the truth, no matter the cost. The first real confirmation of Naomi's darkest fears came in a most unexpected way, through an innocuous conversation with her friend and interior decorator, Ava Martinez. Naomi had invited Ava to discuss nursery designs, choosing between warm neutrals or pastel blues. As they flipped through fabric swatches in the living room, Ava casually mentioned, "I ran into Christopher at the Pacific Heights property the other day. He seemed surprised to see me there." Naomi blinked in confusion. Pacific Heights property. They lived in Pacific Heights, but their mansion was the only one she knew of. "Are you sure you saw him?" "Maybe it was a business visit," Naomi replied, forcing a light tone. Ava hesitated, sensing Naomi's confusion. "It's possible. I was visiting a client across the street. I waved at him, but he looked like he was in a hurry. He was with a woman, but I couldn't see her face." Every nerve in Naomi's body went on high alert. Christopher had never mentioned owning another property in the same neighborhood. Why would he? Their own mansion was one of the largest in the area. The conversation with Ava replayed in her head for days. She decided to do some digging discreetly, asking the family lawyer, Jacob Wilcox, if Christopher had purchased any new real estate. Jacob, bound by client confidentiality, danced around the subject. But his evasiveness only increased her suspicion. Naomi eventually resorted to a more direct approach. She quietly rummaged through Christopher's home office while he attended a late-night business dinner. The desk drawers were filled with paperwork for Harrington Innovations, but something told her to check the locked filing cabinet in the corner. Using the spare key Christopher kept hidden behind a row of books, Naomi unlocked it. Her heart pounded as she sifted through manila folders until she found a real estate file. It was a recent deed transfer for a grand turn-of-the-century mansion in Pacific Heights, a multi-million-dollar property that overlooked the bay. Her gaze fixated on the buyer's name. Christopher Harrington purchased through a shell company. Naomi's gut lurched. This was the final piece in the puzzle. Christopher had indeed purchased another home, and for reasons that he had kept hidden from her, Naomi didn't confront him that night. Instead, she waited until the following morning, rehearsing her questions, determined to get answers. But Christopher left for the office before she woke, and she spent the day stewing in her own frustration. By evening, her fury had reached boiling point. When Christopher finally strolled into the house around 8 p.m., she confronted him in the foyer. "Care to explain this?" she demanded, thrusting the property deed in front of him. His face paled as he took in the document. For a few seconds, words failed him. That was all Naomi needed to confirm what her heart already knew. He tried to spin a tale. The property was an investment, a potential retreat for visiting clients, or maybe a corporate guest house. But Naomi's eyes blazed with righteous anger. "You bought a private mansion in our own neighborhood for corporate use. Why was I never told? Why was it purchased through a shell company?" Panic flickered across Christopher's features. Naomi realized he was improvising every word, stumbling through half-truths in a futile effort to quell her accusations. Finally, she dropped the real bombshell. "And who's the woman you've been seen with there?" He attempted to deny everything at first, but under her unrelenting stare, the facade crumbled. Shaken and cornered, Christopher let slip Felicia. Morgan's name. He insisted it was just an arrangement, just a place to spend time when they had to work late, a convenient space for brand strategy sessions. But Naomi wasn't naive enough to accept that story. She demanded honesty, threatened to call his board of directors, his lawyers, anyone who would listen. His words tumbled out in a torrent of defensive justifications, overshadowed by Naomi's heartbreak. At last, with tears in her eyes, Naomi backed away, struggling to remain composed for the sake of her unborn child. "You're a liar." She spat a tremor in her voice. "I believed in you, in us. Now I see I was just a placeholder. Someone to give you heirs while you chase your fantasies." The confrontation ended, with Christopher pleading for time. "Let me fix this." He begged. Naomi turned away. In that moment, she was unsure if anything in their life could be repaired. In the days following that explosive confrontation, Naomi felt like she was living in a haze. She had never imagined that the man she fell in love with, the man who used to hold her in his arms and speak of building a legacy together, would betray her so callously. Even as her baby grew inside her, promising the hope of new life, Naomi felt more alone than ever. She sought solace in familiar places. One afternoon, she visited her parents, Leonard and Marcia Blair, who ran their old bookstore just off Chestnut Street. While sipping herbal tea behind the store's counter, Naomi confided everything to her mother. Marcia's face tightened with sorrow and anger. She knew Naomi's marriage was far from perfect in recent months, but she hadn't realized the extent of Christopher's deceit. Leonard, overhearing from the stacks of books, quietly emerged to envelop Naomi in a comforting hug. Later, Naomi returned to the estate, feeling a surge of resolve. The heartbreak lingered, but an ember of indignation flared deep within her. She realized that if Christopher had lied about this property and Mistress, he might have lied about more. To protect herself and her child, she needed facts, unassailable documented proof of Christopher's business and personal entanglements. What if he placed company shares finances, or even their marital assets in jeopardy? She remembered that Christopher's world revolved around deals, acquisitions, and expansions. Now she sensed an opening, if not for revenge, then at least for protecting what she and her future child deserved. Naomi enlisted the help of her close friend, Sarah O'Neill, an accomplished attorney who specialized in corporate law, over coffee in a quiet corner of Café Revele. Naomi spoke in hushed tones, telling Sarah about Christopher's mansion. Purchase. Sarah listened intently, occasionally scribbling notes on a legal pad. She agreed to do some preliminary investigations, looking into Harrington Innovations' corporate filings and Christopher's personal financial records. Legally, Sarah couldn't reveal certain details if they were confidential, but she could guide Naomi on the steps to gather evidence properly. Meanwhile, Christopher oscillated between guilt-fueled apologies and self-justifications. He insisted that he cared for Felicia, but only emotionally strayed because of the mounting pressures he faced, and he never intended to leave Naomi. The statement was an insult on top of injury. Naomi saw it as a flimsy excuse, yet she couldn't fully walk away, not yet because of the life growing inside her, and because she had begun to formulate a plan. When Sarah's initial findings arrived, they painted a more complicated picture of Christopher's holdings. It turned out Harrington Innovations was on the cusp of finalizing a major merger with another tech giant. This merger would net Christopher an enormous payday, but only if he remained in control of his shares, and the deal went through smoothly. Any hint of scandal could make investors nervous, possibly jeopardizing the entire arrangement. At the same time, Naomi discovered documents that hinted Felicia Morgan held some shadowy position in Christopher's new property development venture in Los Angeles. Naomi's blood boiled as she realized Felicia was not just a passing fling, but a carefully placed piece in Christopher's empire. The property he'd bought for her was lavish enough to raise eyebrows among shareholders if they learned it was financed through corporate funds or unethical means. Naomi smelled blood in the water. Naomi confided in Lisa Thompson, Christopher's longtime friend and business collaborator, hoping to glean more information. Lisa was genuinely shocked. She had suspected Christopher might be straying, but had no idea he was buying properties for a mistress. "He's playing a dangerous game," Lisa murmured. "If news of this leaks, it could tank his public image. Investors have zero tolerance for scandal." This was the moment Naomi realized her own power in the situation. With the help of her attorney friend, Sarah, she started compiling evidence, bank statements, suspicious wire transfers, property deeds, and phone records. She didn't yet know exactly how she would use it, but she wanted to be ready for whatever legal or corporate battles might arise. Consumed by her sense of betrayal, Naomi barely slept at night. Instead, she lay awake, feeling the soft kicks of her baby, letting her anger swirl around her like a gathering storm. Christopher's calls to talk things through went mostly unanswered. When they did speak, it ended in arguments, her furious demands for honesty clashing with his desperate attempts at damage control. But Naomi was no longer the naive wife who overlooked the possibility of deception. She recognized the cunning behind Christopher's success. Now that cunning had turned inward, poisoning their marriage. Her heartbreak hardened into a steely determination. She would protect herself and her child from whatever fallout might come. If Christopher wanted to risk his empire for a mistress, Naomi was more than willing to call his bluff and perhaps seize that empire for herself behind the scenes. Harrington Innovations was in a frenzy. A monumental merger with Apex Global Technologies was weeks away from completion. Shareholders on both sides anticipated a massive payoff. Christopher had championed this move for years, seeing it as the keystone that would elevate him from millionaire to billionaire. But the process was fraught with regulatory checks, compliance audits, and an army of lawyers ensuring every I was dotted and every T crossed. Unbeknownst to most, Christopher had already been dealing with a precarious financial balance. Although the public perceived him as flush with capital, he was heavily leveraged. The expansions into real estate, hospitality, and marketing ventures had drained more resources than he'd expected. The merger was his lifeline, promising a swift infusion of capital that would cover his debts. And then some. In the middle of this delicate operation, rumors started surfacing, vague whispers about Christopher's personal misconduct, impropriety in real estate deals, and hush-hush-hush money. A junior associate at Apex Global brought up concerns with his boss, referencing an unverified blog post about a Pacific Heights scandal involving Harrington's CIO Word, got back to Harrington Innovations' board of directors, who immediately demanded reassurance. At a hastily convened meeting in the company's glass-walled executive boardroom, Christopher stood at the head of a long oak table. The board members were a mix of venture capitalists, old money family investors, and tech-savvy entrepreneurs. They fired questions at him, like artillery shells. "We've caught wind of some concerning news about personal assets being purchased with corporate funds," said Margaret Kim, an influential board member who prided herself on her no-nonsense approach. "Can you clarify?" Christopher, wearing the confident mask he'd perfected over the years, breezed through a rehearsed explanation. "I assure you, all acquisitions are above board. Certain properties in Pacific Heights and Los Angeles are part of long-term strategies. Everything has been vetted by legal counsel." He omitted Felicia Morgan's name, entirely deflecting any personal involvement. Still, Christopher could feel the tension in the room, sense the skepticism swirling beneath the surface. Meanwhile, Naomi, from her vantage point, continued gathering evidence. She understood that if the board or potential partners discovered the real nature of Christopher's hidden property purchases, the scandal would strike a death blow to the merger and cause the company's value to plummet. Investors loathed unpredictability, especially when it reflected moral or legal lapses at the highest level of leadership. Watching this unfold from the periphery, Lisa Thompson decided to confront Christopher. She had been one of his strongest allies, an early investor, and had watched Harrington Innovations rise from a garage startup to a tech titan. One afternoon, she cornered him in his office, the city skyline glinting behind floor-to-ceiling windows. "Tell me the truth," Lisa implored. "Is there something going on with Felicia? Is she the reason you're risking everything you've built?" He tried to sidestep. "Felicia is an asset to our marketing strategy. She's savvy connected." Lisa's brow furrowed. "Stop insulting my intelligence. People are talking, and this could blow up right before the merger." After a tense pause, Christopher admitted in a roundabout way that he had a personal relationship with Felicia. He insisted it was under control, that no corporate funds had been misused. His voice wavered, betraying the uncertainty behind his confident facade. Lisa left that conversation feeling deeply uneasy. She wondered if Christopher had become so arrogant that he truly believed he could juggle a scandalous affair and a multi-billion-dollar merger without repercussions. Or worse, perhaps he was blinded by his feelings for Felicia and the illusions of grandeur. Christopher, in turn, felt cornered. Felicia urged him to secure her future. She desired more power, more money. At the same time, Naomi demanded accountability, threatening to expose him if he didn't come clean. The board pressed for transparency and reasserted moral clauses in his contract that could see him ousted if personal misconduct impacted the company's reputation. Under this mounting pressure, Christopher made a crucial miscalculation. He underestimated Naomi's resolve. He believed wrongly that she cared too much about her personal reputation, that she wouldn't risk a public scandal during pregnancy. He assumed he could placate her with financial settlements if push came to shove. He presumed Felicia would remain discreet as long as he paid for her lavish lifestyle, and he assumed the board would maintain unwavering loyalty because he was the genius behind Harrington Innovations' meteoric rise. What he failed to see was that the chessboard had changed. Naomi was no longer an unsuspecting spouse. She had become the queen he neglected, now maneuvering her pieces with incisive strategy. With each new corporate document she collected, and each quiet conversation she steered, Naomi moved closer to a checkmate that Christopher never saw coming. Naomi knew that if she exposed Christopher's betrayal to the public, it would be disastrous not just for him, but also for the livelihoods of thousands of employees who depended on Harrington Innovations. This moral dilemma weighed heavily on her. She hated that her husband had put her in this predicament, yet she also recognized her own needs, and the fact that Christopher's continued duplicity could endanger her financial security, her unborn child's future, and her mental well-being. Still, she wasn't out for more revenge. She sought justice and security. She wanted Christopher to feel the consequences of his actions, but also ensure she and her child were protected. Thus she turned to Sarah O'Neill once again, who suggested a quiet but potent strategy. They would compile irrefutable evidence of financial misappropriation and personal misconduct. Then they'd present Christopher with a stark choice: relinquish a controlling interest in Harrington Innovations to Naomi, or face a public scandal that would eviscerate his empire. The plan was bold, even ruthless. But Naomi's heartbreak, fueled by maternal instinct, propelled her forward. Armed with forensic accounting reports and phone records, Sarah and Naomi confronted Christopher in his office late one evening. The vast floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the twinkling lights of San Francisco, a city that had once embraced Christopher as a golden prodigy. He looked up from his desk with an air of irritation he hadn't expected them. "Naomi, Sarah, what's going on?" he asked, forcing a polite smile. Without mincing words, Naomi laid the evidence on his mahogany desk. "I know everything your shell company. The hush-hush funds for Felicia, the property in Pacific Heights. I can prove you used corporate resources to fund your affair." Christopher's skin blanched. He scoffed in disbelief, but couldn't disguise his trembling hands. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice dry. Sarah took the lead. "We're not here to start a tabloid war yet, but it will become a legal and public relations nightmare unless we reach an agreement." Naomi's voice wavered with a mixture of anger and sadness. "I want a controlling stake in Harrington Innovations and a secure future for our child, sign. These documents transfer the shares to me or watch your precious merger fall apart under the weight of scandal." Shock contorted Christopher's face. He tried to counter with outrage, calling her demands preposterous. "This is blackmail!" he roared, slamming his fist on the desk. But Sarah calmly pointed out that blackmail would imply illegal activity on their end. They were merely presenting him with a choice about how to handle legal evidence they possessed. In a desperate bid to preserve his pride, Christopher appealed directly to Naomi. "You're my wife. We promised to stand by each other. We can fix this together." Naomi held his gaze. "You should have remembered our vows before you gave away my place in your life to another woman." Tears brimmed in her eyes, but her resolve didn't waver. "And you have the audacity to think we're still a team." For the first time in his life, Christopher Harrington felt the precarious position of his own making. Every angle he played seemed cornered. The empire he'd worked so hard to build now stood on a knife's edge, threatened not by outside competitors, but by his own indiscretions. He knew Naomi had enough evidence to cripple him. He also knew how fragile investor confidence could be one major scandal, and the entire merger with Apex Global would likely disintegrate. His stock value would crater, and he'd be left with a mountain of debt. After a painful silence, Christopher's anger shifted to something else, fear and resignation. "Naomi, I'm sorry." He whispered, his eyes avoiding hers. "I never meant for it to go this far." Naomi swallowed hard, the lump in her throat almost choking her response. "It went this far because you let it," she said. "Now you have a choice to make." Eventually, Christopher lifted a shaky hand to sign the transfer documents. In that moment, he effectively ceded control of Harrington Innovations to Naomi. The power she never sought, but desperately needed to protect herself, was now hers. As Naomi and Sarah left the office, the weight of finality pressed on Naomi's shoulders. She clutched her abdomen protectively, feeling her child shift inside her. She couldn't tell if she was triumphant or utterly shattered. Perhaps both. The man she once adored had proven himself fallible, even monstrous in his selfishness. Yet from the embers of betrayal, Naomi had seized a new strength. She would have to see this through to the end, wherever that end might be. Naomi spent the next few days in a whirlwind of administrative tasks and emotional aftershocks. By the time she had the controlling shares in her name, a sense of power and dread swirled together inside her. This was no small corner shop. It was a multinational entity worth billions. Suddenly, she found herself at the helm of Harrington Innovations, responsible not only for her own financial security, but for the futures of thousands of employees. She was quick to assemble a trusted team of advisors, including Lisa Thompson, who agreed to guide Naomi through the intricacies of running a tech behemoth. Sarah O'Neill also stayed close, ensuring all legal aspects of the transfer were airtight. Naomi met with department heads and board members, carefully navigating the precarious tightrope between a smooth transition and a potential revolt. Many employees recognized her from philanthropic events. Some were curious, others concerned. After all, Christopher had been the face of the company from day one. But once Naomi explained her vision, investing in sustainability, workplace well-being, and ethical business practices, she found a growing base of support. People respected her resolve and the clarity of her principles. During this transitional phase, Christopher was conspicuously absent from the office. News of Naomi's takeover had spread swiftly, but quietly, among top executives explained, as Christopher voluntarily stepping back due to personal reasons. In truth, Christopher was reeling, stripped of his command. He felt aimless, angry, and humiliated. He spent his days holed up in the Pacific Heights house with Felicia, whose facade of loyalty began to crack once she realized the money taps were not gushing as before. What was a mistress to do when her golden benefactor had lost his luster? Felicia pressed him for details, complaining about having to scale back her lavish lifestyle. Christopher, simmering with resentment, lashed out, claiming he had sacrificed everything for her. Tensions escalated. One day, Felicia found Christopher brooding in the living room, scanning the news on his tablet. A piece in Tech Tribune speculated about changes in Harrington Innovations' leadership, with an unconfirmed report that Christopher had ceded control to Naomi. Though the article was short on specifics, Felicia saw the writing on the wall. Christopher was in free fall. Meanwhile, Naomi's health demanded attention. She was now in her third trimester, and despite the emotional whirlwind, she made time for prenatal checkups. With her mother and father at her side, she learned that her baby was healthy, developing well. but the doctors warned her to keep stress to a minimum. That was no easy task, given that she was about to attend her first Harrington Innovations board meeting as the new majority shareholder. The day of the meeting arrived. Naomi stepped into the same glass-walled boardroom where Christopher once commanded absolute respect. Board members looked at her expectantly. She delivered a concise speech, laying out her strategy, finalize the merger with Apex Global, but with a strong emphasis on transparency and corporate ethics. Some members were skeptical. Margaret Kim, who had grilled Christopher earlier, spoke up. "We appreciate your drive, Mrs. Harrington. But do you have enough experience to see this through? It's a critical juncture for the company." Naomi responded calmly. "I'm aware of the stakes. I've surrounded myself with experts in finance, tech, and law. My goal is to protect the company's integrity and its people. We must show the world that Harrington Innovations stands for more than one man's ambition." The quiet confidence in her tone surprised even her. She realized that in forging her own path, she'd found a new kind of strength. After the board meeting, the members seemed cautiously optimistic. The bigger challenge lay in calming the public and Apex Global. While Apex's lawyers probed the details of the leadership shift, Naomi's team worked tirelessly to assure them that the transition would not impede the merger. Gradually, the initial turbulence began to subside. All the while, Christopher simmered in the background, resentful that Naomi had outmaneuvered him. The more he tried to rally support among employees or board members, the more he realized that his empire had been built on ephemeral loyalty. People admired him for his brilliance, but their trust had dissolved once they learned of his reckless personal scandal. His anger turned inward, boiling into a toxic mix of shame and bitterness. For Naomi, each victory in stabilizing the company felt overshadowed by heartbreak. She had wanted a partner and father for her child, not a corporate empire. Some nights, as she stared at the city lights from her office, she imagined a different life, a simpler one where Christopher remained faithful, and they continued building their dream as a couple. But fantasies evaporate under harsh truths. The child growing inside her deserved a future free from the chaos Christopher had unleashed. In the eye of this storm, Naomi tightened her grip on the company reins. She might not have sought power, but she would wield it responsibly, determined to transform Harrington Innovations into a beacon of principled success. And though the final showdown with Christopher loomed like a dark cloud, she knew she was prepared to face it head-on. While Naomi stabilized the corporate world, Christopher's personal life spiraled. Felicia, Morgan, feeling she had hitched herself to a falling star, grew increasingly agitated. She complained about everything. No more weekend trips to private villas, no more lavish jewelry or designer clothes on demand. The mansion in Pacific Heights felt suddenly empty, devoid of the promise and excitement it once held. "I didn't sign up for this," Felicia hissed during one of their arguments. Her voice echoed off the high ceilings, a reminder of how vacant their supposed paradise had become. "You said we'd be unstoppable." Christopher's temper flared. "You think I planned this?" he bellowed. "Naomi manipulated me. She blindsided me." His accusations rang hollow, as even Felicia could see how Christopher's own actions had led him here. Desperate to reclaim a sense of control, Christopher started drinking more heavily, turning to expensive whiskey as a coping mechanism. On some nights, he would show up at parties or exclusive clubs, trying to mingle with old business associates. Yet he found them increasingly distant. Word travels fast in elite circles. Once the rumor spread that Christopher had lost his seat of power, the invites and attention dried up. Tensions reached a breaking point when Felicia discovered that Christopher had put the Pacific Heights mansion on the market. She flew into a rage, accusing him of casting her aside. In truth, Christopher had no choice but to sell. He owed millions in loans and margins that were coming due, and with no steady flow of revenue. Liquidation became his only option. Seething and humiliated, Felicia packed her bags. She left in a swirl of fury, slamming the door behind her with such force that a nearby vase shattered. Meanwhile, Naomi guided Harrington Innovations through the final phases of the merger with Apex Global. She was open and transparent in negotiations, insisting on a thorough audit of both companies. By exposing Christopher's hidden financial maneuvers up front, Naomi demonstrated accountability and integrity qualities that surprised the Apex Global team, who had expected more subterfuge. The scandal that might have derailed the deal became a testament to Naomi's leadership when she tackled it head-on. Once the paperwork was signed, the formal announcement followed. Harrington Innovations and Apex Global Technologies would merge under a new corporate banner, aiming to revolutionize cloud security and data analytics. Naomi would serve on the new board, representing the majority-stake Apex's CEO, David Lane, praised her in public statements, highlighting her honesty and visionary approach. Christopher watched the press conference from a lonely bar stool in his once glamorous Midtown club. Flashes of photographers captured Naomi's poised stance at the podium. Polite applause filled the air as David Lane lauded her role in bringing the merger to fruition. Seething Christopher swallowed another gulp of whiskey. He had founded Harrington Innovations. He'd built it from the ground up, but now the spotlight shone on Naomi, and from the outside it appeared entirely justified. In a last-ditch attempt to salvage some dignity, Christopher tried to contact Naomi. He found her at their old marital home, packing some personal belongings into boxes. The baby's nursery was almost complete. Small plush animals stood guard on brand-new shelves. Amid the pastel decor and delicate baby blankets, Christopher felt acutely the weight of what he'd lost. "What are you doing here?" Naomi asked her back straight, her voice calm but cold. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "We need to talk," he said, quietly, swallowing the knot in his throat. I've sold the Pacific Heights place. Felicia's gone." Naomi's face flickered with mixed emotions, a pang of sorrow, a flash of anger, perhaps a trace of pity. "You should talk to my attorney, Christopher," she responded, focusing on her packing. "I've moved on to protect our child's future, and frankly, there's no place for you in my life unless you're ready to accept responsibility for what you've done." Christopher stepped closer, his voice raw with desperation. "I am ready. I can fix this. I can be here for you. And the baby." Naomi shook her head. "The time for that was months ago, when I first sensed something was wrong. Now I have a new life ahead of me, a new role. If you want to be in your child's life, we can discuss terms civilly. But as for us as husband and wife, you gave that up." Her words hit Christopher like a punch to the gut. Yet he knew they were true. In that moment, looking around the nursery, he realized just how thoroughly he'd been the architect of his own downfall. Any illusions of waltzing back into Naomi's life had vanished, replaced by the stark reality of what betrayal cost. Christopher spent the next several weeks trying to pick up the fragments of his shattered life. Almost all of his personal properties were sold to cover debt. Ironically, the only real asset he had left was a modest trust fund set up by his late father. The once glittering parties and high-profile networking events no longer welcomed him. Banks froze lines of credit, and he found himself paying legal fees to untangle the mess of shell corporations he'd hastily created for Felicia's sake. One damp, foggy evening, Christopher stopped by the old family workshop in Oakland. The building stood abandoned, a relic of simpler times, when his father's woodworking tools shaped solid, enduring pieces of furniture. He unlocked the dusty door and was assaulted by the scent of sawdust. Long-settled memories flooded back, afternoons helping his father craft cabinets, the pride he felt in creating something tangible. The hollow ache in his chest reminded him of how far he'd strayed from that grounding. Meanwhile, Naomi's star soared. In a gala event celebrating the successful merger, she was honored by the Silicon Valley Women in Tech organization for exemplary leadership in transitional mergers. She accepted the award gracefully, visibly pregnant, her soft glow enhanced by a simple but elegant gown. The applause was thunderous as she dedicated the honor to every woman who's had to fight through heartbreak and hardship to protect what truly matters. Realizing that revenge had no place in her new life, Naomi chose not to publicly drag Christopher's name through the mud. She knew the satisfaction of humiliating him would be fleeting, and her priority was building a stable world for her soon-to-be-born child. Through her actions, she also won the respect of the new board and the merged company's investors. But karma has a way of catching up to those who try to outrun their misdeeds. And for Christopher, it arrived in the form of a brutal lawsuit. A group of former business partners accused him of fraud, claiming he had misrepresented corporate assets when persuading them to invest. The lawsuit threatened to escalate with potential criminal charges if intent could be proven, worn down and penniless. Christopher had little fight left in him. He pleaded for a settlement, but the plaintiffs refused to back down unless he made a full confession of guilt. Faced with these dire consequences, Christopher had a moment of reckoning. Late one night, he composed a heartfelt letter to Naomi, part apology, part confession. He admitted to forging certain documents, funneling money through shell companies to impress Felicia, and lying to everyone around him, including himself. He wrote of his regrets, the love he once had for Naomi, and the child he hoped to someday hold in his arms. When Naomi received that letter, she shed quiet tears. She passed it on to Sarah to be used as they saw fit, uncertain whether to believe Christopher's remorse was genuine or simply another ploy. Yet in a rare instance of compassion, Naomi decided to meet him one last time to grant him closure and see if his apology was real. They met in a small conference room at Sarah's law firm. Christopher appeared gaunt and subdued, the confident spark in his eyes extinguished. He spoke in a trembling voice, admitting that he had let ambition, greed, and lust overshadow his moral compass. He reiterated his request to be part of their child's life. Naomi listened, tears clouding her vision, remembering the man she had fallen in love with years ago, a young dreamer brimming with potential. "I appreciate your honesty," she said softly, pressing a hand against her pregnant belly. "I'm willing to let you see our child, but under strict legal arrangements. You'll be a father if you can prove you've changed." Christopher accepted the conditions, fully aware he was in no position to bargain. In the weeks that followed, he cooperated with the legal investigation, making amends to his defrauded partners. Though the process drained him of almost every remaining resource, he finally began to understand the value of humility. His father's memory loomed large, a reminder of simpler, more honest aspirations he had once possessed. Naomi, on the other hand, thrived. She oversaw the final integration of Harrington Innovations into the new corporate entity, championing ethical leadership and expanding philanthropic endeavors. Her baby arrived in the spring, a healthy boy named Gabriel. In that moment, every heartbreak and legal battle faded, replaced by the overwhelming love she felt for the tiny life in her arms. By the time Christopher was allowed supervised visits with Gabriel, he seemed a changed man, quieter, thoughtful, even gentle in the presence of his child. Whether or not redemption was possible remained to be seen, but at least he had taken the first steps toward it. In the end, Naomi had not only survived, but triumphed, turning betrayal into an opportunity to strengthen herself and others. She didn't just take the company, she took control of her own destiny, and in doing so, she ensured her child would grow up in a world defined not by a millionaire's mistakes, but by a mother's unwavering will and wisdom. Naomi's journey teaches us that even the most devastating betrayals can spark transformative power. When her millionaire husband's scandalous purchase for his mistress threatened to destroy her, Naomi reclaimed the very empire he took for granted. Through strategic brilliance and courage, she seized controlling shares of Harrington Innovations, ensured justice for all involved, and built a better future for her child. Her story is a testament to resilience. No matter the depth of heartbreak, no matter how grand, the deceit a determined heart can rewrite destiny. If you found Naomi's tale as riveting and inspiring as we did, please like this video, share it with anyone who needs a reminder of the power of perseverance, and subscribe to our channel for more dramatic real-life stories. Your support helps us continue bringing powerful narratives of courage and redemption to your screen. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for our next story.